depending on how close people are to the end of a working career, their financial security in retirement is in no way a niche topic to them. So, the ability in a way to help people with that problem on the basis of evidence, to protect them, to help in a way intermediate a relationship between the financial services industry and products that might be provided and what's in the best interest of members is something that is very important to us.
You're listening to Life 2, a podcast from Don Ezra and Commonwealth. Don Ezra is a former co-chair of Russell Investments Global Consulting and creator of the retirement website donezra.com. His latest book is Life 2, How to Get to and Enjoy What Used to Be Called Retirement. Commonwealth is a mission-driven business that works with associations, unions, and employers to provide collective retirement plans and has been recognized internationally for its work in addressing the global retirement challenge. On Life 2, we've taken a tour of the retirement life cycle, from the time you start saving to your retirement years, while also taking a look at the global retirement challenge. We have been fortunate to speak to leading experts on the topic, and now we end our pilot series with a conversation between Don Ezra and Commonwealth's founding partners, Alex Mazur and Jonathan Weisstub, who share how they've put to work some of the ideas discussed on the show.
So I've thoroughly enjoyed doing all these podcasts. And one of the things I've enjoyed is the people we've had as guests. And from my perspective, I like to think of this one as you are the guests. So tell us about Commonwealth, the company, about your role in it.
Great. Well, this is a fun episode to do because we have a chance to think a little bit about what some of our guests have told us over the course of the different interviews, and think about how we apply that in the work that we're doing kind of each day with clients and partners around strengthening retirement security. So I'll start off and then Jonathan can jump in. So we started Commonwealth together in 2015, really with the goal of expanding access to retirement security largely for people that don't have access to really high quality pensions. And we had this instinct that, the pension is something that has a huge amount of relevance for people's lives, because retirement, as we've heard over and over again on the show, is not an easy thing for people. It's challenging. It's expensive as well. It's something that you have to save consistently over long periods of time. And it's something that it's very easy to mess up by, paying too much in fees, by making investment mistakes, by not managing your longevity risk appropriately, and just falling into things that human beings kind of naturally do. So, the pension seemed like a pretty good way of tackling that in the sense that it's large scale, it's efficient, it has a lot of kind of default or automatic settings. And so how do you take that quote unquote technology of a pension and expand it to a larger number of groups, making it easier and more affordable for more people? So that's sort of our basic mission of what we do. The way in which we do that is really by working with large-scale groups, which we think of as communities. They're often labor unions, professional groups or associations, sometimes groups within a common profession or sector coming together to build and manage large-scale collective retirement plans that we see as kind of adapted to the 21st century labor force. So that's all very conceptual. We can talk more about the sort of specifics of what we do, but that's been our focus over the last 4 years.
Yeah, and they care very much about community. They care very much about their members, and it makes them very effective partners in delivering, what we believe is a very evidence-based solution to the problem that most people face, which is how do I get the maximum amount of retirement based on the least amount of, investment in my retirement, and what does that look like from an income perspective?
And it's interesting, in what you've said, there are two words that really stood out for me. One was access and one is communities. And the idea, one of the things that came up more than once in our episodes was the notion that not everyone has access to some retirement savings vehicle. And so the ability, the the intention of making it available to people who would not naturally have it as part of their work is fantastic. And the other word that came through to me was communities, because when we're employees somewhere, we are part of that community, but we are part of many communities in our lives. And when we leave employment from one employer to another, as most of us do more than once in our lifetimes, we then join another employment community. But we're part of a bigger community all the way through. And thinking of ourselves as community members and making things available with a community spirit, I think then gets to the individual more than to the employer.
Well, oftentimes I think employers now are not full life cycle communities. They are communities for a period of time, and in the current labor market, they're often communities for a briefer period of time. The retirement security challenge is a lifetime challenge. It's not a 5-year challenge. It's not a 3-year challenge. It's not a 2-year challenge. And the question of how you bring a community together to help solve that challenge in a way where people can attach for the full life cycle is part of what we're trying to do with our partners.
And that's not a focus that many have had to this point, to put it mildly, to say, let's define communities, or let's think in terms of communities, and let's serve the community rather than a particular employer or a particular other focal point. The notion that human beings are naturally social beings and we are naturally part of a community, and having that as a motivating factor is different.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes people make decisions on the basis in part of their reference group, of their peer group. And that peer group is often connected to the community that they are actually a part of. And part of the retirement security challenge for many people is making the right set of decisions. And Alex referred to it earlier, how frequently they save, whether they get themselves into trouble in not starting at all, or in undersaving, or not really understanding the nature of the challenge, not really understanding the nature of investments, not really understanding the nature of what it means to provide insurance around longevity. And in a way, it's not possible, I think, for people to do that on their own. It's simply not possible.
Yes, it's not something individuals are conscious of. It's not something they're taught about. It's not something they're brought up with. They live their lives. They do their work. They're part of families, etc. And the idea of then providing for these potentially unknown, almost for most of them unknowable things at some stage in the future when life is going to be different. Yeah. That's not a natural thing for them to think about.
Or even expecting them to know the disciplines that are necessary in order for them to provide an efficient solution around this is in a way, I think our view is it's not really possible. Yeah. The number of things that people need to know and then turn into action and take the time to turn into action and then find in a way the service providers that are necessary in order to make that real for them. That I don't think is a realistic thing for people to actually figure out on their own. And the evidence is that people can't. I mean, if you look at the market right now, there is a lot of undersaving. There are a lot of people in dire straits in some ways financially around these issues. And it's not clear that they're getting themselves out of that without some form of intervention and without some form also, in I think our view, technology.
But the good news is, I think we heard this in spades on the show, is that there are defaults that make sense for large percentages of each group, right? We heard that about savings and default options in plans from people like David John. We even heard that about the decumulation phase when we were talking to Jeremy Cooper, right? So you can set up programs with a community that members trust, and that's really important, that members trust, and that you set up a structure that is trustworthy and has a duty to members. But you can set up defaults that are going to result most of the time in an appropriate outcome for members, which I think is what a lot of people are looking for. Sometimes I think we talked about this on the show too. Like some people say, well, that's paternalism. But I actually think most people are looking for something that's relatively easy and turnkey and that will make the right decisions for them when it comes to this problem. They're not looking to get really involved in retirement planning, except to the extent that they need to.
Yeah, I think most people would like someone to tell them what the right answer is. And in an ideal world, the person who's telling them what the right answer is actually has their interests in mind. And they've thought about their circumstance. They've really thought hard in a way about the circumstance, not in a superficial way. They've taken the best available evidence that exists. They understand in a way both the tax and benefits issues that the member faces in the jurisdiction that they're in. And they're optimizing for all of that in the way that these things are structured. I think that most people would like that. It's just that it doesn't exist right now for many people.
It's interesting that in some countries, some kind of default solution has now been legislated. For example, we had the example of Nest in one of our episodes, and between Nest and Now and People's Pension and so on, the UK has legislated that people are put into something, they can elect out of it. And you talked about paternalism. There was that lovely phrase that Thaler and Sunstein came up with in their book Nudge, and Thaler has since won the Nobel Prize and all that kind of stuff. And they came up with the expression libertarian paternalism. So it's paternalistic to make things available, but it's libertarian in the sense that you're not forced to get into it. The default position is, here's what you would naturally do if this is the kind of thing you want to do, but it's tough to get it done, etc., etc. So we'll put you in, and then you can decide that you don't want to be there. So libertarian paternalism actually works pretty well. And in some countries now, they have that. In other countries, I mean, in Australia, in Chile, which was the first of them, they actually have contributions to the national plan that are compulsory, etc., etc., etc. But now making it available, because in many countries, not even half the people have natural retirement savings vehicles available to them through the workplace. And so making this available is really very important. Another word you mentioned, these, as you say them, these words sort of resonate in my mind. You talked about the interests of the people. One of the notions is fiduciary responsibility, that it's not just we're doing a transaction, but I am actually here to do things with your best interests in mind. And there's a big debate going on in some countries about whether or not one should simply be doing a business transaction, or whether the person who is knowledgeable should actually be providing a fiduciary responsibility, a fiduciary duty to say it's your interests that I have in mind. These are really big issues.
Well, I think oftentimes there's been a bit of a perverse concept of fiduciary duty, which is that people don't really want to take responsibility for what they know is the right answer. So the idea of discharging the duty has been that you give people options and they choose, and then you've in a way absolved yourself of responsibility because it was their choice, not yours. You may very well know in giving them that information that they've made a wrong choice, but you don't want to tell them that they should make a different choice because you don't want to take the responsibility for that. Now, the concept of duty in how people interact with financial products right now, when you think of where they're coming from, often they come from institutions where there is an incentive to sell a product or a series of products that are on a bank's platform, an insurance company's platform. They create those products. There's no, I don't think, ill intention in the way they're provided to people. But they are, make no mistake, they're products of a financial institution, and people are in a transaction with that financial institution. The best interest of the shareholder is what drives that transaction. It's not the best interest often of the purchaser of that product. And people don't always understand that because they mistake sometimes a personal relationship for a duty that the person may have in the interaction that they're having around a financial product.
Well, it also comes down to alignment of incentives, right? Like if you look at the better pension institutions in the world, or retirement institutions, they tend to have one goal, which is to do, kind of maximize outcomes for the member. And they're not serving two masters in a sense of having to maximize returns to shareholders on the one hand and trying to serve the members on the other hand. We've seen that in the Australian case pretty starkly over the last couple of years. And so part of what we try to do in the plans that we set up is make sure there's that alignment there, setting up the kind of profit for members structure that I think Will Sandbrook talked about in the interview with him, setting up the right expertise and making sure there is that duty there and that people understand. I think most people expect, if they're being served on something as important as retirement, that the people serving them do have their best interest in mind. And so you'll often see polls about this, and they're surprised that actually fiduciary duty is a relatively rare concept outside certain kind of pension plan environments in the financial services sector, it shouldn't, in my view, be particularly controversial because it's what the customer expects. And it just strikes me as the right thing to do, especially when you have asymmetric information, right? Like, this is a complicated field. You're serving people that don't have a lot of knowledge. And so having some sort of duty in place makes a whole lot of sense, as it does in something like, medicine or law or other professions that are highly complex. But it's still relatively rare, especially in the retail environment.
Yeah, it's not the norm, and part of it, and maybe there's been a lot of litigation, in particular in the United States, that people really don't want to take that duty on because it is complex for them. They get sued for providing what others then perceive later as the wrong advice, and they don't want to get into it. But there's no reason why it's not possible to do that if you set up the right structure.
And the best employers just take it on naturally and just say, this is what we're going to do, and that's all there is to it. It's not, oh my goodness, we're running scared. It's we know more than the employees do. We know more than the participants do, and so we'll do things. And so the idea of giving access, the idea of creating default options to say, for most people, this is the way things would work sensibly. Now, you don't have to go that way. If you have your own thoughts, you can do it your own way. But let's create a sensible default. All that kind of thing actually is highly desirable and very nice when you get it.
Well, and part of it is I think that there's a whole lot of evidence for that. So it's not as though people don't know, whether it's here or internationally, what the right answers are in a lot of ways around what are the right defaults, what's the right approach,
right.
What are the right behaviors that we're trying to create. It's not a mystery. And so in a way, when it's not a mystery, then why not set up structures that align the incentives and actually deliver it?
Yes. One nice thing society could also do is provide some education as well, so that people will actually be better able to look at it and say, A, I appreciate what's happening over here, and B, by the way, I think I'm a little different from the average person, and so here's how I want to tilt it, etc., etc. But that education is very difficult to find. Financial literacy, investment literacy, all these things are not part of what we're educated to do when we go to school, when we go to university. Those are not general subjects.
But if you think about it, I want to go back to some of the ways in which your thinking has influenced us. I mean, if you go to the areas that we really should be educating people to make informed choices about, to me, they're more about what kind of life do you want to live in retirement? What do you want to do with your time? What would a great life in retirement look like? Which is a lot more than money, although you need money in order to have that life. And then, focus people's choice and deliberation around that. And then once you know what that is, you can solve back from that and help them figure out how to finance it. And that's not an area, the how of how you finance it is not an area where I think people want a lot of choice. They want an efficient vehicle that's going to, as Jonathan said earlier, turn their savings into that income in as efficient way as possible, in as easy a way as possible that doesn't take a lot of their time, but that's aligned to their goals. But as you've said, often society doesn't prepare us very well for thinking about what kind of life you want after you finish up your full-time career.
Part of it as well is that often financial literacy or education is only that. And the problem with only that is that it doesn't actually allow people to act. So if there is no easy thing that someone can do afterwards that is perhaps connected to a form of technology or program that allows them to do something which doesn't take a lot of thought, doesn't take a lot of effort, but actually delivers that result, that is the business that we're in, which is to understand that people want something like this, but that thing doesn't yet exist. And that's the thing that we've created with our partners that we want to give as many people as possible access to. So you can't give people education and then say, well, now you're on your own. Why don't you go figure it out? Because in a way, it just gives them anxiety.
Yes. And
there's nothing worse in a way than saying to someone, here is your diagnosis. I'm sorry, and I can't do anything for you. Or you go figure out how you're going to fix this.
Right.
It's the worst form of pain. And in a way, really, what we want to do is to give people something that gives them joy, to give people something that gives them a solution to their problem, not something that gives them the pain of having to then search for that solution. And the problem in part with the market right now is that there is no clear solution that they can turn to. You can say, I've diagnosed your problem, and based on the evidence, you're not doing this, this, and this. But how do I make it easy for you to fix that problem? That's really more of the challenge that we're trying to address.
So talk a little more about how you help with that.
Well, the way in which we help with that is by partnering with, as we were talking about before, partners that care very much about their members. And we provide, in a way, technology that supports a solution for them that optimizes that outcome. And that solution really is around ease of enrollment in a program, ease of being able to allow people access to debit money from a bank account or payroll, and ease in a way of choice, that the investment options are limited, that there is access in a way to annuities as part of this, so that you're purchasing longevity risk insurance, and that all of that is geared towards maximizing income in retirement, which is what we think people are looking to try and solve for.
Because that whole issue of income in retirement is living a life. In the same way that while we're working and while we're raising a family and all that stuff, we're living a life. And that's the important thing. Work is part of that life. We hope it's fulfilling, but it's also the wherewithal to be able to live life as we want. And then when the work stops, or when it becomes part-time and we're into life 2 instead of life 1, as I think of it, we still have a life to live. And the ability to have financed this, and then the ability to say, and I have some ideas as to what I would find motivating and fulfilling, that's very important. And that continues. And this whole issue of retirement is about the broadest based issue that there could ever be.
Well, I mean, people want, I think, predictability of income. They want certainty. And unfortunately, as people age, they don't improve cognitively. Mm-hmm. And in a way, we're pushing sometimes the most complex challenges to the least equipped members of our society to deal with those challenges.
Yeah.
And the way in which we design our programs is that they're not meant really to think very much about what kind of income they're going to get in retirement. It's meant to turn into a paycheck. And we want to get as close as possible in a way to that predictability and set them up for that.
Yeah, the groups that we're working with, it's interesting. We talked a lot about, the post-retirement phase on this show, and you've written a ton about it. And there's increasing discussion about how do we solve this challenge? Can we get employers to do more about this? And we're part of conversations, every week where we're working with our partners, and they're pushing us to do more on decumulation. They're saying, look, our members want something. Our members want guaranteed income for life. Our members want education. They want to stay in the plan. We've got 75 and 80-year-olds who are looking to us for value, which is amazing, right? Because it pushes us to do better and come up with better solutions. So part of it is finding communities that people are going to stay attached to for long periods of time, so long as they perceive there to be value there. And as you've said many times, Don, just because you're retired from full-time work doesn't mean you don't have a demand for community. In fact, you may actually have more of a need for community at that stage, not just for financial issues, but for other issues as well. And part of the kind of macro, I guess, thesis of how we think about things is, I think, society needs strong civil society organizations like labor unions, like professional associations, like other forms of community. Those groups are looking for ways to create tangible value for their members that lasts a long time, not just during work, but post-retirement as well. And retirement is not the only area they could do that, but it's a really significant one, particularly when you look at how much money you can save somebody by doing it right, as opposed to doing it the way that people often do it if they're left on their own.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of estimates of the savings are in the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, depending on what income band you're in. It's not an insignificant amount of money to leave on the table. And there's no real reason for anyone to do that if they have access to a better way of doing it.
Tell me about some of the communities you're working with.
So I'll give you a couple examples. We created a plan for low and moderate income healthcare workers, folks like personal support workers or home healthcare aides, as they're known in the U.S., working with a union called Service Employees International Union here in Canada. We are working with a very broad range of stakeholders and leaders in the not-for-profit sector, including a number of foundations and nearly 100 employers, to create a national portable retirement plan for Canada's charities and nonprofits. There's about 2 million people who work in the nonprofit sector in Canada, and only about half of them have access to a workplace retirement plan. So this is meant to be a plan that's accessible to those, especially who don't have access to a plan today. We're currently working on a retirement security project with a union called Unifor, which is Canada's largest private sector union, has a bit over 300,000 members. We're working on a collective retirement plan for physicians with the Ontario Medical Association. So physicians in Canada, although they're part of a publicly funded healthcare system, are mainly self-employed or incorporated professionals, and the vast majority of them don't have access to a workplace pension. And so they've been asking physicians as a group for some time for a kind of workplace retirement plan or collective retirement plan. So that's something that we're working on, a life cycle plan with that association, which does a lot for its members, including insurance and a whole range of products and services for them. So it's groups like that. It's groups across the income spectrum, ranging from folks that make $25,000 or $30,000 a year and would be saving for the first time, to folks that have significant assets but still don't feel, many of them, very confident that they're going to maintain their standard of living in retirement and don't fully trust what they're doing today when it comes to retirement planning. So it's very interesting to try and serve these different groups. They have some similarities in terms of the principles that we try and use, but some real differences both in terms of their financial needs and in terms of the dynamic of the communities. So each process is really a process of working very closely with the group to try and customize something that's sufficient for the group.
That's great. So one can take this notion of community even further as one looks at the retired community and say there are services that they need, and it would be nice to have sort of national associations and local chapters and stuff like that actually provide services that they took for granted while they were working. Mm-hmm. And now that they're not, they need this kind of thing and provide all that kind. And that will work in both directions, because it's not just useful for the retirees, but the retirees are themselves a huge community that has more time available to be able to do things for the community. And the notion of an opportunity for society to better itself, to improve itself, while at the same time providing motivation for the retirees. I mean, that's, what was the expression, win-win? I mean, everything improves that way.
I mean, there's also something, I think, very powerful about older members of a community speaking to younger members of a community about the kinds of things perhaps that they regret, or things that they can do now that will improve their financial prospects later on. For older members of a community that have made, say, what they perceive in retrospect to have been suboptimal choices, if you can inform someone who's younger who doesn't really think about this right now, that there are consequences in a way to inaction, or consequences to poor behavior or action, that's actually a very powerful gift that older people can give to younger people in that community to change their behavior and therefore change their outcome.
Yeah, and that's wisdom, because that's sort of, it's the experience, but there are lessons from the experience, and that's what wisdom is. And when you're young, by definition, you don't have that. And the ability to have access to that before you have to make all your own mistakes. Of course, you learn from your own mistakes. Heaven knows we all have. But the idea of actually learning from other people's mistakes in advance is just so powerful and so useful.
Yeah, and part of it, I think, for us is that the peer group is very powerful. That when people see themselves in each other in a peer group, then it's much easier for those lessons to resonate, and for people to, in a way, collectively support each other in these things in a way that brings a better outcome. And I think of us as providing, in a way, the technical support and the technology to enable it, but ultimately the real power comes from the communities themselves.
Yeah, and more these days we identify ourselves as belonging not just to our family, but to multiple communities, depending on the kinds of activities we have and the kind of friends we have, etc. And so we're members of many, many communities, and the interaction within a community, across communities, is very powerful. So if you're making that easier for people to do because they have fewer worries, mm-hmm. and they have more enjoyment, that's just a good thing. Thank you.
No, I think the people do want this. They want these solutions. I think that the idea is sort of an interesting idea that this topic is somehow a niche topic for people.
Yeah.
Is a kind of funny concept in a way, because it's not a niche topic. I mean, people's financial security is in no way a niche topic to them. And depending on how close people are to the end of a working career, their financial security in retirement is in no way a niche topic to them. So, the ability in a way to help people with that problem on the basis of evidence to protect them, to help in a way intermediate a relationship between the financial services industry and products that might be provided and what's in the best interest of members, is something that is very important to us. I mean, that's in a lot of ways, I think, one of the main purposes of the business. I mean, we first and foremost really want to help people with, in a way, evidence-based solutions to this problem that is very core to many people's feeling of well-being and psychological security.
I have the impression, I don't have evidence because I don't mix in those circles enough, but I have the impression that employers are becoming more and more willing to look at their employees' well-being, financial well-being, health, etc., because it's going to help them too. I mean, again, it's a win-win kind of thing. You have happier, healthier, more financially secure employees. You're going to get greater productivity out of them. So everybody wins with that. Now, I have the impression that this is now something on the upswing.
Well, I think that there are many employers that certainly feel that way. I think the question for employers is often, can we do this in a way that doesn't threaten our balance sheet?
Yes.
Can we do it in a way that doesn't create undue liability for the business? I mean, there's a broader, in a way, macro issue going on now, which is that some people have acknowledged that capitalism isn't doing very well, and that there is perhaps more than just thinking about what is maximizing shareholder value. And the question of what is the duty, perhaps to society more broadly, the duty to employers, is now an issue that is probably more complicated now, from a business perspective, than it was 5 years ago.
How one reconciles
those things in a way that feels comfortable.
Yes, exactly.
But if you go back, it's interesting, if you go back to when employer pensions started to emerge and really spread, the view of the role of the corporation society was a little bit different. It was more akin to some of the statements you're hearing, more recently, for example, from the Business Roundtable about, considering stakeholder interests, considering employee interests as part of the goal of the corporation, and not just, trying to maximize profits in the short term for shareholders. And so you might say, if there is a swing, and I think it's too early to tell whether there will be a swing, there's been rhetoric, but will there be a swing away from shareholder primacy? And if so, will that lead to more focus on high quality retirement benefits for workers? I mean, we hope so. We're optimistic about that. But sort of time will tell over the next couple of years to see what companies do.
And there's certainly many business executives who would make a very strong argument in favor of what Alex is referring to now.
Yeah.
That the investment in employees, the investment in benefits, the investment in the psychological and financial health of employees and the broader obligation to society is actually very good for business.
I mean, there is a huge role for the employer. I mean, if you go back, employers do deserve a lot of credit for the spread of workplace retirement plans for Pillar 2 of the system. It was enormous. And there are still many, many people who have coverage or who could have coverage through their employer. So our model isn't to suggest that, the employer-sponsored retirement plan isn't a good vehicle for some. It's just to say we need to broaden our idea of who should be a sponsor in a world where people are going to have multiple employers throughout a career, where some people may never have a traditional employment relationship, and where you've got this whole group, as you've said, of retirees who don't have a direct link to their employer. So can we broaden the universe of people? But to the extent there are high road employers or large companies that want to do the right thing and try to be innovative, that's absolutely necessary if we want a strong workplace retirement pillar of our system.
Yeah, and I think our view is that there are plenty of those employers.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not like you need to, go looking for a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
But, there is something to life cycle that many employers are unable, in a way, to provide. And what does it mean to get attached to something that will follow you throughout your working life and protect you throughout your working life. And that currently doesn't rest with the financial services industry.
Well, the world, society will always have a number of issues as things evolve, and we will see different kinds of solutions evolve. And we've been lucky enough to be able to chat along the way with so many of the world's best thinkers. We've been very, very lucky with the people who have chatted with us.
Well, one thing that it's underlined for me is, in order to solve this problem, you do need a variety of disciplines, right? I mean, you need, math, you need finance, you need technology, you need human psychology, you need education and marketing to come together. And so
you also need high quality investment products. And
Yep.
and as part of this, you can't forget that's part of what drives ultimately the value for people.
Yes.
And different kinds of investment products. I mean, and they need to be brought together and managed in a way that people who understand what it means to deliver value are managing the providers around that and holding those providers to account on the way they provide those services.
Yes.
And people can't do that. I come back to the same point. It's not possible, I think, in our view, that people on their own would be able to figure that out. It's too much to ask of people that they can actually do that.
Yes, because many of those things are so specialist in nature and so complicated that to expect the average person to be able to cope with that kind of thing is as unlikely as having the average person become their own doctor, their own surgeon, their own lawyer, whatever. I mean, these are specialist fields. You still need to be able to understand broadly how things work. And the way I've thought of it is that you don't have to be an expert yourself. You have to know enough to be able to use experts and communicate with them. And the thing on which the individual is an expert is himself or herself. And how do we then say, this is who I am, here are some issues I have, you are the expert on this particular issue, help me with it. And so you interact with them that way.
I mean, what's interesting is it's both expertise, because you do need all of the disciplines that Alex is referring to. And it's a lot of different disciplines to come together in the service of this one thing. It's also that if you don't have a group with a group purchasing power, that the price of those services, even if they did exist, would be too high.
Yes.
And it's not enough in a way to know that you want something. And to try and price it on your own. It's that actually in coming together as a group that you're able to get the right price for it.
Yeah.
And you can't, so in a way you can't really do it on your own. Even if you had a fair amount of money to do it, it's actually quite difficult to do.
Yeah. Well, here we are. We've been chatting about all this stuff. We've had the benefit of being able to chat with some of the world's experts on a number of these subjects. We haven't solved the world's problems, but I'm hoping that our listeners have got a lot more insight into the kinds of problems that exist, the kinds of solutions that are being applied, what kind of people are thinking in what kinds of terms, and some of the things that they may be able to relate specifically to themselves and their own situations and benefit from that.
Yeah, I'm coming away from this project feeling more optimistic. I mean, there is a lot of innovation that's happening around the world. As Jonathan said earlier, I think the answers in some cases are fairly clear. It's just a question of implementing them. And I'm really excited about this idea of adding, value, not just so people can be financially secure, that's obviously really important, but also so they can, lead a really fulfilling life when they're older. Because, as you've said, there's a vast kind of untapped human potential there. As we, as we're healthier and living longer, there's a lot people can contribute. There's a lot they can enjoy. And if we can be a small part of helping them get there, then that's, really exciting.
And there it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Don.
Thanks for listening to the Life 2 podcast. To purchase Don's latest book, visit donezra.com. And for more information on any of our guest experts, check out Commonwealth's website at cwretirement.com/podcast.